Back on the podcast today is Coach Patrick Henner, and if you listen to this conversation in full, you're about to learn the exact training philosophy behind a world record from the coach who built it. Coach Henner breaks down why most runners are wasting their time in the gym, the truth about double threshold and why it's not the magic bullet you think it is, and the one shift in how you think about speed development that could literally change your next season. He also drops the framework he uses to develop athletes at every level, from high school to a world record holder like Hobbs Kessler, and explains why the best coaches on the planet are still studying like beginners. Whether you run a 5K or coach a team, this episode will make you faster and smarter. So hit the follow so you never miss another episode like this one. Leave a 5-star review, it takes next to no time. And if this podcast has helped you, share this with a favorite training partner, a teammate, a coach, family member. Always helps us grow this podcast. So without further ado, enjoy this impactful conversation with the man behind Hobbs Kessler's recent success, Coach Patrick Henner. Ladies and gentlemen, he's not back, he's better. Mr. Patrick Henner, Coach Patrick Henner. How you doing, man? Third time's a charm. An honor and privilege to speak with you again.
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm excellent. Always look forward to our conversations. Obviously, I, along with most of the world, saw what Hobbs did in the 2K. I ultimately ended up having him on the podcast. Love Hobbs. Great personality, great character. But my first instinct was to reach out to the man who orchestrated that success, which is yourself. And at the end of my conversation with Hobbs, I was asking him a little bit about Alex Honnold's, climbing XYZ building. I forget the name of it, and his background in climbing, which kind of coincides with yours. And he said that's kind of how you guys met. So before I dive into some of the nitty gritties of speed development and all the questions you love to cover, how did you meet Hobbs, and how did your mutual love of lifting kind of transpire into the coach athlete relationship that you have today?
Yeah, it was kind of funny because I knew of Hobbs, of course. It was the summer after he had run the 334. And I just happened to be in Yosemite with my two sisters, and we weren't even climbing, we were just hiking. And I had parked my car near this lot where a lot of climbers camp. It's called Camp 9 when they're climbing in Tuolumne Meadows. And I went down to my car to get something on my car to then go back up to where we were camping. And I saw this car pull in, and I was like, oh, I think that's Hobbs. And so then he got out, and his high school coach, Ron Warhurst, I'd known Ron and been friends with him for many, many years. So, then Hobbs and I just had a long conversation and swapped numbers. And then he ended up being at NAU that fall, and I was at Arizona State. And so then that fall, his first year at NAU, I would go up and climb with him, on some of the weekends up around Flagstaff. So that's how we met.
How did that early relationship go into, I think you were more of like kind of a consultant with him, helped him occasionally, to now really having the reins and calling the shots?
Well, I don't know with Hobbs if you'd ever say anybody's really calling the shots, to be honest. Just trying to help guide him. And I think it's just like it kind of started like that. We had a lot of conversations when we were climbing just about training and this and that. And then he had some rough times especially his first year out as a pro. And, we had, one good long conversation where I was just like, hey, I'm kind of surprised nobody ever talked to you about how hard this first year was going to be. And then things just kind of evolved from there. But then we climbed more. I advised him more. Then I got more heavily involved with just his speed development and things like that. And then it just kind of evolved from there. But by the time I got involved, the pattern of training that he and his dad and, Ron Warhurst had, so there's been a lot of influences on Hobbs, and all of them have been good. And so it's just now just kind of like doing a little bit more, day-to-day guiding than I did previously.
You've been given remarkable athletes in your past, like Mike Smith and Milt. I'm joking. Not that they weren't good athletes, but they're no Hobbs Kessler. What I want to ask you is a kid like Hobbs, right? He's 22 now, already set a world record, but coming out of high school, I think he was kind of viewed as like a second coming of Drew Hunter. And I know Drew. I love Drew. Drew, if you're listening and you're offended by this, you can call me. I mean this with the love and respect in the world. The ceiling that Drew was kind of expected out of high school, you could say, is some of the stuff that Hobbs has gone on to do. And so when Hobbs was coming out of high school, I think there was a big, the world was speculating. Should he go to college? Should he go pro? If he goes pro, what should his trajectory look like? And then you kind of come into the picture and you're handed this, I think you could say, once in a generational athlete. He could still be in college today. And if a college NCAA athlete ran 3:48 in the mile, much less running that, and then another 60 for a 2K and setting a world record, it would break the internet. So for you, what's it like to have this once in a generational athlete? And how do you ensure that he continues to be successful while also still have his, best running ahead of him because he is still so young?
Well, to be honest, I don't really think that I'm the one who's going to make sure he continues to improve and get better. I mean, it's really going to be Hobbs. I can, I think the thing is what I can really provide to Hobbs is, if you're thinking of a forest with a bunch of trees, like probably if you're looking at each individual tree, Hobbs knows just as much or more than I do about each individual tree in that forest. But just with the experience I have over the years, I can kind of get up on the mountainside and look down at the whole forest and see how all those trees work well together to create that forest. And so it's, I think ultimately it's really, Hobbs, maturing physically, maturing mentally in his approach. That's ultimately what's going to determine the type of career that he's going to have.
I think I've heard this analogy from Coach Smith before, which is somewhat similar to what you were saying there, which is, the athlete's in the driver's seat, the coach's job to be in the passenger seat and just inform them if a hazard is coming up or, if a car is behind them or, to slow down a little bit. Like you're teaching the driver how to drive, but you're not driving for the driver. And I'm interested by your response there, which is like Hobbs is ultimately responsible for his success. Can you elaborate on that further? I think in a culture that wants to offset all pressure, all expectation to it's all the coach, when it sounds like you're saying it's more the athlete.
Well, I can just facilitate resources and ways of looking at things, right? Of like, hey, we need to just not look at the workouts. We don't need to just look at mileage. All those things are important. But we've also got to look at every single thing from whether it's lifting weights, whether it's sports psychology, whether it's recovery, and all those different things. And so, I think that's where I really come in with Hobbs, is just saying, hey, here are some resources we haven't taken advantage of yet, or here are some areas where I think can really make a huge difference. And, and two of the words that we're really, or concepts that we're really working on this year are resilience and being scrappy. And I think that if he's going to continue to develop, which I think that he's, because, his training age and how hard we've trained is he's trained really hard at times, but if you look at his training age, it's still not, he doesn't still have a huge training age. So I think there's still, a lot of room for him still to improve. But I think it's also going to depend on, that resilience and the willingness to be scrappy.
You've had, and we've covered this in previous conversations, really successful tenures at multiple different universities. To my knowledge and my time in the sport is certainly limited compared to your extensive success in the sport. So I could be off on this, but
are you just saying I'm old? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying I'm young. I was born in 2005. You were probably coaching Milt at that point. When did he come through? When was he in college?
Man, I'm terrible at this, to be honest. Let me see. So I got there in like 98, 99. So he was there from like 98 through like 2003, maybe something like that.
Yeah. So He graduated before I was even born, so I think this is a me being young thing, not you being an being old thing. To my knowledge, you haven't coached many professional athletes in the past, but you have had a lot of gifted collegiate athletes. But obviously, the NCAA is radically different in terms of training, lifestyle, expectation. How have you tried to expand and learn and be your best self as a coach with this endeavor of coaching a professional athlete who's at the top of the sport?
Man, I'll tell you what, it's been I've learned a lot in the past 3 or 4 years working with Hobbs from just it is like my last few days or last few years at Arizona State, Georgia. Like it's just the whole thing of double threshold coming into vogue. Fueling, lactate testing, a lot of these things. Like when I started working with Haas, I mean, he knew, probably still knows more about all that kind of stuff than I do. So it's been a real, for me, I've learned a lot. But that's kind of what's made it exciting too, right? Is like saying, hey, here's some things that I didn't really know that much about. But but I think all the overall concepts that work with, whether it's a high school runner or a college runner, still works for the pros. And kind of the thing, Dominic, that's always interests me about the sport is development. And whether it's a high school or college pro, and you think about Hobbs, I mean, when I first started working with him, he would have been like a sophomore in college, right? So it's still development. And I still feel like at this point for Hobbs, still development. I mean, yeah, he did set a world record. So people say, well, he's already developed, but no, he's not. I mean, he's still 22. So, so that's the thing that's always excited me about coaching. Like, if somebody handed me a team that was, all the top guys in the world, and I could just go out and dominate NCAA cross country or something like that, that doesn't excite me that much, to be honest. I wouldn't be a good manager of a pro baseball team like the Yankees or something, but taking somebody from point A to point B over time, that's what's always fascinated me about the sport. And that's what I love to do. And so that I just have to take that same concept and with Hobbs, and even though he's a pro at the highest level, it's still, to me, it's still athlete development. And so, and that's something I pride myself on. I think that I'm really, really good at that. So that's what that's what I've been channeling with Hobbs, just saying, hey, we don't need to look at this as like, oh, you're already there. We need to, it's like, no, we're not really where we want to be as an athlete and a person. We still have room to grow and develop. And get more resilient, become a scrappy racer, things like that. So I think it's just goes into that development, and that's what I enjoy, and I think that's what I'm good at too.
You had mentioned being introduced to double threshold. What's your love life with double threshold like? The experience of maybe hearing it for the first time, being skeptical, not being sure what it is, to now obviously incorporating a lot of that sort of work with Hobbs on a weekly basis. And sounds like you're a double threshold believer. So maybe walk the audience through what it is and in your experience with it.
Well, I mean, for Hobbs, I mean, it's typically, and he described this, I mean, he usually is doing double threshold on Tuesdays and Saturdays. And just depending on when we're doing it and how much of a stimulus and how hard we want it to be, is going to depend on, like, is he trying to keep it more LT1, lower levels, slower, or push it up into LT2? But it's also not a panacea, right? And I think that a lot of people just think like, oh, if I just go out and do my double thresholds, that's all it's going to take. But I think there's a lot more to it, and I think kind of and that's something that Hobbs and I are trying to get better at this year. Is trying to see how to sustain that deeper into the season, but also without overdoing it, and also without compromising a quality workout that you're trying to do on Friday, maybe if you did on Tuesday. So it was kind of one of our points when it comes to training of like, hey, let's let's not cut back on these Tuesday sessions too early in the year. That's it's definitely still a work in progress, but it's also something where I feel like I've always been a big believer in like a multi-tiered training system where, whether it's lifting, sprinting, plyometrics, nutrition, sleep, mileage, workouts, all those different things, you have to put them all together. Otherwise something's missing and you're going to have a chink in your armor.
In previous conversations, you've described to me at length kind of the speed development, which is on the other spectrum of what we're talking about. Double threshold being, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the professional here, but sort of, I think, easier than the sort of threshold work a lot of professional runners were doing years ago. I would see groups do like 8 by a mile pretty darn hard and think, okay, the last 2 miles, I don't know if that's threshold. You guys are kind of ripping. So speed development one end, double threshold at the other. It seems like you're a coach who really thrives in these sort of like specific niches of training. Were you like this back in the day? How did you study the sport, and how have you evolved as a coach in terms of your beliefs and your practices?
It's really interesting because, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but kind of initially my whole spiel, even I think going back when I was recruiting like an Andrew Bumbleow who ran for me at Georgetown, and then ran for Nike, and really selling the idea that, hey, you're not just a runner, you're an athlete. So I'm looking at all around athlete development, and so I was really pushing the idea of lifting weights and sprinting and doing drills and things like that. I think before a lot of other people were, to be honest. And then when it really started kind of cementing more when I went to USC and working with like Quincy Watts and Carol Smith Gilbert, this idea of like, hey, really the where you need to be spending most of your time is, aerobic development, like the threshold, double threshold, and the speed and power areas. So that it really kind of solidified to me as a concept, when I got to USC.
What coach or mentor or even a book you read, someone you never met, had the biggest influence on how you view the sport in your coaching?
Oh, definitely Coach Gags. He was a huge influence on me. I had, just in terms of just overall program things, Bill Walton at James Madison University, Coach Carroll at USC and Georgia. There's a lot of different people, and I've always been one to like, reach out or talk to people. And to be honest now, I mean, like, two of the biggest influences on me are Mike Smith and Chris Miltenberg. So, we chat regularly about training and things like that. And like, I coach those guys, but I still learn a lot from them. There's some really smart guys. So, I like to take advantage of my resources.
I love it. You mentioned earlier in our conversation a lot of success, not all of it, but a lot of success being on the athlete themselves. Can you answer this hypothetical for me, which is, do you think success in the sport of running is more so the athlete or the coach? Like, could you take a really talented athlete? For instance, I know enough about coaching to be good. I know probably 10% of what you know. Could I do my best coaching Hobbs Kessler, and could he turn out great? Or would it be an absolute disaster? And do you think that changes depending on the level you're at? For instance, the best high school coach won't be as good as the best, professional coach. If you have a really bad professional coach, still going to be a lot better than a really bad high school coach, because there are levels to things.
Well, you coaching Hobbs, I think you would do just fine because he's, somewhat self-coached, to be honest. I mean, Hobbs knows, I think I've done a really good job of especially helping like fine tune him when we're getting closer to races. I think I have, he kind of already had his system, and I'm like kind of holding him back at times and things like that. But so he's probably not a great example. But I think there's some high school coaches out there that are better than some of the pro coaches out there, and and then there's some great pro coaches out there. I mean, just because you're a college coach or pro coach doesn't necessarily mean you're better than a high school coach. So I think a lot of that is opportunity and circumstances, right? I was lucky to get into the college game because my high school coach, was Ron Helmer, and then he, helped me get a job at James Madison, and then brought me to Georgetown, and then I kind of, even at James Madison, I kind of hooked my wagon up with Coach Gaggs, and then I had some successful athletes because I was kind of copying his workouts and stuff. So, I think a lot of it, to be honest, is like opportunity and circumstances, and being in the right place at the right time. But then also, like Mike Smith, Chris Miltenberg, a lot of people might say their circumstances. Oh, Mike was at NAU. You're training at altitude. You got this, you got that. Or Milt got great athletes like Parker or Ethan Strand or, whoever you might, Grant Fisher. But you know what? I think one of the things people don't understand about like guys like that is like they outwork everybody. They're some of the hardest workers. So you have to have the opportunity. You have to have made the right connections. There's a talent aspect there, I think, for good coaches, but then also, I think the best coaches are some of the most hardworking coaches as well, too.
In terms of training theory, do you think the high school coaches are that much different than the pro coaches, specifically off the statement you made that there are a lot of high school coaches who are better than some pro coaches?
I couldn't really speak to that, but it seems like now with, just like your podcast and so much that's available now online, and, it seems like, training now for the top programs, whether it's college, high school, or pro, are kind of more resembling each other now than they ever have. And I think that because there's good science now, and there's, a lot of proof of this, all the aerobic work is, really pays off. I think that, I think there's a lot more similarity than differences now with the best programs and the best coaches in terms of just overall training philosophy.
Would you, based on what you know, and let's assume the high schooler we're talking about doesn't have a crazy academic load because outside stress can influence training, would you ever recommend double threshold for a high school or NCAA student?
High school or NCAA?
Either or. Pick your poison.
It's a good question. I just think it depends on the circumstances. I think it depends on the training age of the athlete. I think it depends on, how durable the athlete is. I think there's so many different variables there, and I think there probably are some high school athletes out there that could benefit, but I don't really think that many, to be honest. My concern is like, okay, if you're doing enough volume in high school that you really need a second workout, then but there are some kids out there that can handle that and it's appropriate for, so it's not wrong in every single case. And I would say the same thing on the high school. on the college level where, I would say a lot of freshmen in college, if they're coming out of U.S. high schools, probably don't need double threshold right away. Now, some of them are ready for it, but, so I don't know. There's so many different variables and so many different, training atmospheres and, what's their academic load that it's really hard to say, to be honest. Sorry, I quit so much on that answer.
No, it's good. That's good. In terms of having success with Hobbs, has it made you think on expanding your horizons to start coaching other people? I think of like a Mike Scannell type person who had a lot of success back in the day. No one heard from him. Picks up Grant, picks up, honestly, all sorts of random athletes. I just hear so-and-so is being coached by Mike. These two influencers who run 240 in the marathon are being coached by Mike. Has this little taste of success made you think about getting in the game in a larger way?
At this point, to be honest, I'm pretty, I'm I'm going to be pretty picky about who I want to coach because if there was somebody who really wanted to come in and team up with us and work with Hobbs and myself and the rest of the guys train there in the very nice track club, that would be fine. I'd be more than willing to help somebody out, but I'm not actively you know going out there and looking for people to coach.
I want to hear a legend's perspective on the what I will deem the NCAA crisis happening right now, all the political talking points. What's your take on transfer portal, international kids, state of the sport from a 30,000-foot view?
I mean, to be honest, I think I would be a dinosaur in the sport because I just don't, you know, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but me personally, just, like I would go back to before, I'm all about athlete development. I'd rather, get a bunch of guys out of high school and try to finish top 20 at NCAA's and, the just piecing together a team. I just have no interest in that, and probably therefore, the way things are now in college athletics, I probably wouldn't make it. So, um, so some people are in some places where they don't really have a choice, right? I mean, if the athletic director, hey, we need director cup points out across country, well, or you're not going to have a job. Like, okay, I'm going to go get some older foreign athletes that can just come right in and bang away up at the front. But that just doesn't interest me that much. I mean, what interests me, like I said before, is just like athlete development, and that's you know it excites me just as much with some of the high school kids I work with as it does with Hobbs, to be honest. I work with a few local kids here and there, and I got a few other kids I work with across the country, and their development and seeing them do well, that to me, going to their state meet, I get just as excited and nervous as I do, going to watch Hobbs race.
The high school level is one that's developing rapidly. I think because of the point you made earlier, which is the knowledge gap that used to exist, what professional coaches or athletes used to have. Anyone with, a phone these days can kind of have accessible to themselves how they train, how they think, what they do. I even think of this podcast, if you listen to enough episodes, I think you'd be knowledgeable enough to put together some sort of blueprint. The high school athletes you work with, what are their general challenges in the sport in terms of where they are versus where they want to be, and how do you help them fulfill that gap?
It just really varies. I mean, I've got a few kids, high schoolers that I just kind of advise. They have good high school coaches, and there's a few that the coach doesn't know a whole lot, and so I'm more actively involved in giving them actual workouts and things like that. So it runs the gambit, really what I like to see is, and I kind of just sometimes it kind of I'm kind of confused of why some coaches are always out there trying to get better. And even like Mike and Milt, like they've been sending me text messages and pictures of books that they're reading about training and stuff. Now I'm like, so here's you would say two of the best coaches in the world, or definitely the country, and they're still trying to get better. So and for me personally, when I was coming up, like I was always trying to learn from like a Coach Gags or Ron Warhurst. I'd always go try to hang out with him, learn how he's coaching his guys, and so I'm kind of confused now when I see some coaches out there that aren't actively trying to get better. So it's a little, I just don't understand that, to be honest. To me, it's just like, okay, if you're an athlete and you're not trying to get better, well, why are you doing it? If you're not getting better, you're getting worse.
Let me propose this to you. Do you think it's because when a coach or an athlete has success, they think they've almost made it? And when I think of a Milt or a Smith, I don't think they'll ever feel like in their career they made it, even though they've already had great success. I feel like those two guys think like there's always a next level and a next level. And to get to that level, they have to keep learning and evolving.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, for me, it's easy to get an ego and think you have all the answers, right? And what worked for one person, even a system that like you say, oh, this is how we got Hobbs to the point where he could run that world record in that 2000. Here's the 10 to 12 weeks that led up to that. Okay, well, that's the blueprint we're always going to use. Well, guess what? The next person comes along, things might have to be different, right? So, I think that that's one of the really cool things about the sport is that like you're never going to have all the answers in it. Like even if you've got a great training philosophy and a great system, each athlete you work with has a different mindset and a different biology. So you're going to have to tweak something here or there to make your philosophy work.
I want to talk about double tap on what you said earlier about making these runners actual athletes and the importance of that and how you learn that from some of your mentors and former colleagues or coaches back in the day. One of the key aspects I'd love to pick your brain on is sort of the gym aspect. What should runners be doing in the gym? Just at a very base level. Let's assume we're speaking to a high school athlete or someone who runs recreationally but wants to get better. Because I think for years, Coach, years ago, when I first started this podcast, it was taboo to ask even if you went to the gym. You'd hear 50-50. Someone say yes, someone say no. 2026, it seems like it's a fact that, strength training will make you a faster runner. And now I think the question is, well, what kind of strength training? So from a guy who I think has a lot of experience and knowledge on that side of the sport, what would you say to someone with next to no understanding? All they know is I should be strength training, but I don't know where to start.
So I think when if you think of your running as being, if somebody's running 70 miles a week, probably 80% of that is just easy running, right? So the intensity is at a certain level. Like, so when we go into the weight room, we want it to be high intensity, which for the most part means heavy weights, right? So, if you think when you're running, when your foot hits the ground, it's, I don't know, 2 to 4 times your body weight. So you're not going to get the stimulus you need when you're in the weight room unless you're lifting heavy. So I had kind of always thought that, but then when I went to USC, we had a really good strength coach, Tatiana, and the guys were in there, deadlifting heavy and stuff. And I was kind of always like, oh my God, they're going to be trash for it. And then, 48 hours later, they put together a great workout. So it definitely kind of solidified to me that like, okay, that's the thing is we got to go in the weight room. When we go, we're trying to go in the weight room and almost forget we're distance runners and become sprinters or jumpers or, whatever sport you want to compare it to. So you're almost looking for the exact opposite stimulus that you're getting. You want a very high intense stimulus when you go into the weight room.
Does your opinion on what you just say change depending on what distance? Would you recommend that for a marathoner as much as you would Hobbs training for a 2K world record?
Definitely, 100%. I mean, and I think besides the performance values is you're just going to become a more durable, robust athlete, right? And when you're, to get strong bones, you have to bend the bone, right? So you can get that in a pretty safe manner in the weight room, doing like quarter squats and trap bar deadlifts, hang cleans and things like that. So you've got to put enough stimulus on there to engage the nervous system and bend the bones. And so that's, obviously that's going to make you a more powerful athlete to perform better, but it's also going to make you more durable and more robust as well too.
If you're watching the Winter Olympics now or the Super Bowl, we'll take football, for example. Those guys are not practicing football 100% of the time. It's actually quite split. I know a lot of the strength coaches. I'll study what those guys do in the gym because I'm fascinated. A lot of their work is actually done in the gym, just becoming like these monsters of men who happen to, play a specific position on the field and be really good at that. That's not saying they don't have specific drills or a quarterback won't go through, the whatever footwork or throwing the ball, routes, etc. But they do quite a lot in the gym. What fascinates me with the sport of running is it seems like we've had this sort of theory for ages and ages that you just need to run and that'll be sufficient. Why do you think our sport is kind of lagging behind what a lot of other sports have found out, which is this foundational work that will benefit you as a human being, will also benefit you on top of that in athletics, as you're saying, becoming a better athlete and then throwing the sport after that?
Well, I mean, I think that, even to this day, I mean, things have changed with double threshold and all that, but I mean, it's still, most people are still relying on all the traditions of, and pre-concepts that we've had for, 50, 60, 70 years. Right. And so, and I think in a time like as the sport came through, if I never, and I was a pretty successful distance runner, now became a coach or what, and I never lifted weights because I didn't know anything about it, and I still don't know anything about it. That's not in my experience. So I think it's just been evolved as, now you're getting coaches who has some experience with it, some knowledge with it, and then they try to take it to the next level. And then these next group of people who are coming through, it's like, oh, now it's just part of the system. We expect to go to the weight room and have a set program. So I think it just kind of evolves like that, for years and years, you had people coming through and that became coaches that they had no experience with or no knowledge of. And it just wasn't in the tradition of distance running, right? Unless you look at something like Percy Cerruti or somebody like that. So I think it's just, evolved over time like that.
An athlete who's already, hitting workouts hard, doing quality mileage, already feels kind of fatigued and thinks that extra stimulus might just add on to that fatigue. What would you instruct them to do in terms of if they haven't done strength work, they hear you say it's important? How do you think of fatigue as a puzzle? How do you add in something that could cause more fatigue when there's already maybe a good amount of fatigue going on?
Well, so for me, it's like, okay, when should you start a lifting program? You should really start lifting hard when you're really not into the meat of your specific training yet. Okay. So maybe for a high school or college runner, hey, especially if you have the knowledge in the program, like, okay, start lifting hard in June or July when you really aren't even doing that much mileage yet, right? So that your body's adapted to the lifting and to the load, and as you increase your running volume and increase the intensity of your running, you're already adapted to the lifting portion of the of the different stimuluses, right? So I think that's really important. And to me, it's almost the same thing as sprinting. I think a lot of people have this thing like, oh, we don't want to sprint until like the championship season. Where it's like, my belief is like, you need to sprint from day one, right? Like now my body's adapted to sprinting as I'm building up my training load, and now sprinting is not a big deal. So I think the same thing in the weight room. Plus, I think if you have a good strength program, to me, it's more about is the putting it in there. So you're saying that the fatigue of my running training is not negatively impacting my lifting more so than it is my lifting is negatively going to impact my running. And does that make sense? So
Yeah,
I think
I hear you.
the challenge is to find, hey, when is that window for you where you can go in the weight room and lift heavy when your legs aren't overly fatigued from the workout that morning or whatever. And I think some people get that backwards. Okay. They're trying to say, hey, when can I lift that's not going to affect my running? And I think it should be the opposite. It should be, when can I when can I put it in with my running so my lifting isn't negatively impacted by my running. So I think it's too, because if you go into the weight room and you're overly fatigued and you can't lift heavy, well, then you're not getting the stimulus you need out of it. So I think that's kind of the challenge when you're in a heavy training load, is kind of figuring out where is that window that you can put it in and somebody can get a really good quality lifting session.
When do you think, let me preface this way. I've seen a lot of runners go straight into the gym right after their run. Do you think that logically makes sense, or do you think that lift should be spaced out from runs? And assuming an athlete is following a perfect plan, healthy, not susceptible to injury, how many times a week should they be in the gym?
I think you can. I think 2 times a week is plenty. And just what we do with Hobbs. So obviously you've talked about this. He does double threshold on Tuesday, and if you're thinking about that, that's gonna give you some fatigue. But if you're doing it at the right intensity levels, it's not going to overly fatigue you. I mean, that's the whole point of doing all the blood lactate testing, is you don't want to go into the well on that day, right? So then he'll come back and run, 6 to 8 miles Wednesday morning, and then early Wednesday afternoon, after probably 4 hours rest from the run, then he'll go put his lift in on that Wednesday, and then he might do another 4 to 6 miles after the lift. And then usually on Sunday he doesn't run, and so he'll put his second lift in on a Sunday. So I just think it's like, where can I lift and get a quality lift in that I'm not overly fatigued from my running?
Traditional gym culture is big into progressive overload. How do you view lifts with your athletes? Is the goal to become stronger over time? Is it maintenance? How do you view the weights, the progression in the gym throughout a season?
It's really interesting because I feel like this is to me, lifting is it's a long-term investment, and it's like, it may take you 18 months, 2 years, and now all of a sudden now you're getting strong, right? So then it just depends on where you are in that kind of that progression. Okay. Are you still at that point where you need to rapidly keep moving your weights up because there's a learning curve, and you're getting stronger really quick? Have you gotten to the point where you're already really strong? One of the things we really try to look at is just like, moving the bar fast. Okay. Or if the bar's moving slow, you're either fatigued or you're using too heavy of a weight. So we're really trying to think about, like, moving the bar quickly, and I think it just depends on the time of year and where the athlete is in their progression of lifting. Of like, hey, do we need to keep pushing these, the weights up, or are they still getting a benefit kind of from keeping the weights the same for a period of time? So once again, there's just so many different variables. It's hard to make a general conclusion with that.
Holding a gun to your head type of question that you won't love. You could only choose one: speed development or strength training, gym work. Which would you choose?
Whew. Yeah, I don't know. I think one or the other. I don't know. That is holding a gun to my head.
Let me ask you this: if you had to
Well, I think,
succinctly,
you know what? Okay, I'll answer that one. If you could put plyometrics in with strength training, then I would take the strength training.
okay. And how do you view plyos differently than squats or deadlifts or the other type of strength work?
Because in a plyometric, you're really looking for a very rapid, speedy tendon muscle response, right? So you probably could figure out a good lifting program where you're just lifting and doing plyos, and you're still going to get a lot of speed development out of that.
Do you look up to any other coaches in different spaces when it comes to strength training, what they have their athletes doing in the gym? Because I think we talk about run specific training, and I've heard coaches say they have different mentors from different sports. Do you have that for the gym?
Well, Hobbs, the guy that develops Hobbs program is Andy Kay over in Great Britain, and I feel like I'm really good at for strength training for athletes, but he knows more than I do, and I think he's actually better than me on that. So we kind of go with that, and then obviously too, just like I'm trying to pay attention and look at different things that are presented in terms of plyometrics and strength development, and still try to learn. But it's been kind of interesting because some of the um, things that Hobbs and I talked about 4 or 5 years ago, in terms of lifting heavy, in terms of like developing your leg strength and your calf strength and stuff like that. Like, you see more and more of like now it's becoming more common knowledge, and now you're hearing more and more about these things that we were talking about 4 or 5 years ago.
Double threshold was the big kind of mover in this space over the past 3 to 5 years. With your knowledge of the sport, your longevity in the sport, if you could make a prediction analysis of what the next big wave is going to be in the sport of running, what would it be?
I don't know. I think that, like, it's hard to say, but I kind of think it's just like it's going to be just more integration. I feel like, of all those different multi-tiered and better integration. I think that you're seeing it now with better fueling, um, uh, with more athletes doing heavy strength training and plyometrics. So I don't know necessarily whether it's going to be one thing. I think it's going to be the better integration of all those different elements. Maybe I think that the program or coaches or athletes that can, like, get the best, most effective speed development, all the while doing 2 hours of double threshold, all the while lifting heavy, doing explosive plyometrics. Like, how can you put all these different elements together? Does it mean you have to be on a 10-day cycle or a 2-week cycle? Like, so to me, that's kind of, and you're already seeing it now. I feel like, I think that's, a lot of people say, oh, it's the shoes or it's the double threshold. I think it's actually that those things are all important and how the sport has progressed so much in the last 5 or 6 years. But it's also, I think it's been the integration of fueling, lifting, all these different things that have, like, pushed the sport forward. And to me, I think that's what's going to be, um, the coaching program who can best integrate all those different things. That to me is going to be the next level.
I had a thought there, but then I was remarkably invested in what you were saying there, so I forgot. And now I'm remembering it as I'm filling space saying that. Hybrid athletes, have you? I don't know how active you are on social media, but have you seen this wave and culture of hybrid athlete, which is essentially, just to bring you up to speed, the guys that are jacked in the gym, but also happen to be what you'd consider a slow runner, but what society would say 240 in the marathon while being able to bench 275. Okay, this is crazy. Nailing kind of both spectrums. The joke is that for hybrid athletes, it's like they're not good enough to be good runners, so they're better than the lifters. And they're not good enough to beat the best lifters, so they're better than the runners. And that's just kind of the in between. But I don't know if you've seen any of these guys. Have you? If so, what are your thoughts?
I'll be honest, I'm not too aware of that.
Oh, really? Oh, I got
They
to
must
put you
not
onto
know.
this. This is your
Yeah.
next deep dive to go into. In like modern day society, the modern male is basically trying to look jacked while being moderately fast and at the closer to the front of marathons. What I notice is it's almost these guys with gym backgrounds who then discover running and then they're good at it. Whereas I think the people who are runners, it's remarkably hard to go from being a good runner to then putting on like 40 pounds of muscle mass over a couple of years and still be decent at running.
I
You'll have
think
to research this.
Ryan Hall did that.
He's a good example, but I would say it would be if Ryan Hall was as jacked as he is, but still trying to run like sub 3 hour marathons. I'm not entirely sure if he's doing that or not. Maybe he is.
Well, I bet just I do follow him because, obviously from his earlier running exploits, but he's done some crazy link ups in the mountains. I mean, he's doing some world class. So I'm pretty confident that, like, if he really wanted to and he trained for 6 months, I bet he could run a 2:15 marathon or sub 2:20 or right around 2:20, something like that. I mean, because the stuff he's doing in the mountains is just crazy good. I don't know if you saw that he linked up with Killian Jornet on that his state of elevations thing in the U.S.
No, I didn't.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, he's a guy, like, he's still pretty jacked, but I mean, the stuff he's doing in the mountains, I don't have any doubt he could. If he wanted to get back on the roads and run a pretty strong marathon, he probably could.
Wow. The guy who kind of pioneered the hybrid wave, it's actually with the company I work with. It's called BPN Supplement Company. So the founder, Nick Bear, we'll see if my camera picks this up, but let's see. Yeah, do you see how jacked he is?
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's run, like, if people on YouTube can see, I mean, look how defined his back is. So he's run 2:39 in the marathon, which, again, even quality runners could train their life. I mean, the people we know obviously could do that in their sleep as a training run, but the average, that's better than 98% of people. And then he looks that good. It's quite impressive how these guys train, but you'd get a chuckle out of this. If you look that good and you run moderately fast, your whole comment section is going to be filled with people who are speculating you're on drugs. And I think some of them are, but Nick had got so much of that he started releasing, like, his blood tests to be like, no, I'm clean. It's just hard work. So anyways, next time, that's your homework. Next time we talk, I want an analysis of the hybrid athlete.
I'll study up on that for sure, Dominic.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you took an average athlete, how fast do you think you could get them? Or let's say this: you work with a couple of high schoolers, you become a head coach of a high school. How many years do you think it takes to flip around a program?
That's so. I mean, and it's kind of sad, but I mean, if you think about it, it really depends on the demographics of the place, right? Because if you're not in a situation where you can, not have a job after school and have plenty of food to eat at home, and probably have parents that kind of are pushing you academically and athletically, like, probably don't have, it's really tough out there, right? So there's just so many variables in that, but I don't know. I wouldn't even want to attempt to answer that question.
Basically matters more on demographics, support. I mean, I'll say this, so I was homeschooled, or I took online classes growing up, essentially homeschooled. And so my choice to run was for just the public school in my school district. And I was the second ever athlete to qualify for the state championship. That's how bad they were, respectfully said. And I grew up in Holland, Ohio, kind of this unique place where parts were really nice and then parts were not nice at all. And so the high school, Springfield, was a mix where it was fascinating. You have kids, really nice backgrounds, and then kids, really rough backgrounds would make you shed a tear. And parts of me to this day want to believe if the best coach came in, they could have made NXN and won it. But I think the realistic side of me is you could have the best motivator, recruiter going through the halls. You wouldn't get a big team. And of the team you'd get, I don't know if you'd ever really get the results. So I think it's an interesting question versus the private Catholic school down the road that you're just set up way better,
Well, I mean, like when I was coaching high school, I was at Blacksburg High School in Blacksburg, Virginia, where Virginia Tech is located, right? And so, and it's a place was successful with, distance running cross country before I was there, and was successful, probably more successful after I left. So, and there's always been really good coaches there, but it's also, good demographics for having good cross country teams as well too.
Coach, want to be respectful of your time. We'll wrap it up here, but final question for you: where can people follow your work / a book coming anytime soon, a newsletter? You've got thoughts, you've got experiences. Have you thought about people always love when you come on the podcast, but I feel like I'm the only guy to get you on. So have you thought about expanding your thoughts in a deeper way?
No, not really. To be honest, like right now, I'm in a pretty good zone with coaching Hobbs, coaching some of the other athletes that I'm working with, and still trying to learn. And that's I'm pretty happy with where things are right now with my coaching. So no, I'm not I'm not considering anything else at this point.
For now, we'll see.
And,
Well, maybe a book publisher is listening.
Yeah, and I still got some athletic goals. I want to climb a lot more mountains, and hopefully get a little bit better at climbing still. So I'm still working on some other things.
You're still getting in the gym?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yep.
Okay.
It's funny because Hobbs will call me pretty much once a day, and he almost always calls me when I'm at the gym. I was like, Hobbs, why are you always
time?
Yeah, like you call me every single time. It's like, what are you doing? I'm like, you know what I'm doing? He's like, oh, you're at the Y lifting, aren't you? I was like, yep. So
what's your split look like at the gym? And is the focus primarily health or to support your climbing?
A little of both. Just same thing. As you're getting older, you're losing muscle mass, and just trying to keep up with that, so that when summer comes and there's still a lot of 14ers in Colorado I want to get up. So I want to be, ready for that, both aerobically and in the weight room too. So it's pretty well rounded, working with the legs, a lot of pull ups, but pretty basic, but I think pretty well rounded.
Staying in it. Here's where I will bring your age into it. Getting after it for a guy of your age. I don't see that very often. So Coach Henner, always appreciate our conversations. Thanks for always being willing to have them with me. And I know they help a lot of people out. So keep crushing it and study the hybrid athlete. And I'll work on getting you a book deal here soon.
All right. Thanks, Dominique. You take care, man.